Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Kirsten Aiken. Federal government agencies believe that China is behind ongoing cyber attacks on Australian institutions, including hospitals and state-owned utilities. This morning, Prime Minister Scott Morrison said that a sophisticated state actor had been targeting governments, corporations and critical infrastructure in Australia, but didn't attribute which country was behind the attacks. Political reporter Matthew Doran is in Parliament House and joins us now. Good afternoon, Matthew. Why hasn't the Prime Minister publicly pointed the finger?
Well, Kirsten, Scott Morrison says that it's a pretty high threshold for a government to reach when it is actually naming a country as being responsible for such behaviour. But in coming forward and saying that one of these cyber attacks or a series of cyber attacks has happened, it's effectively putting it out into the public domain and allowing other people to join the dots on his behalf. The Council of Foreign Relations believes that there are three main countries that are responsible for sponsoring such cyber attacks. They are China, Russia and Iran. And given the interest that there has been in the past from China in Australian companies and assets, that's leading many to believe that they could indeed be behind this attack or series of attacks as well. Certainly the Prime Minister is saying that this is something, a group that has some sort of heft behind them. The way in which they're attacking these computer systems, the patterns of behaviour suggest it's more than just one bloke sitting in his bedroom hacking away on his desktop computer. It is a sophisticated operation there. The Prime Minister stood up here in Parliament House just after 9 o'clock Canberra time to make this announcement and to reassure the public that the Australian government was doing all that it could to try to safeguard the personal and private data of Australians right across the country. Just over 3 hours later, around 3 hours later, he was actually out on the campaign trail in Eden Monero down in Cooma, just south of us here in Canberra, ahead of that by-election. And in that intervening period, of course, everyone has been trying to figure out who exactly has been behind these attacks. The Prime Minister was given another opportunity to point the finger at a certain country, but he declined.
The government doesn't write the headlines, Brett. The press does that, and I don't intend to interfere in that process. And I've been very clear about what I've said about this today, earlier this morning.
The Prime Minister there speaking in Cooma. Now, because this situation is so serious, the government has reached out to the opposition and provided Labor with briefings about the situation. The opposition leader, Anthony Albanese, said that he is backing the approach that the government's taking, going public with this information. But when he was pressed as to whether or not he wanted to start naming names, he also declined that request.
I'm not going to go into the details, as you would fully expect. These briefings are secure briefings, and I have no intention of breaching any information that I've been given in these briefings.
Matthew, how common are cyber attacks of this kind?
Well, when you talk to cybersecurity experts, it might not be that they're becoming more common, or certainly the prevalence of them is starting to increase, but the sense is that government agencies are being more open about them actually happening, coming forward, and people like the Prime Minister holding press conferences like he did today to actually alert the public that they are indeed happening behind the scenes. It's not necessarily something that the public hears about that often. The tradecraft, a term that we've heard bandied around quite a bit today, is always evolving, but the actual idea of attacking cyber networks, whether they be companies, and we've seen recent reporting on that with hacks on companies like BlueScope Steel, Lion Brewing just in the last week or fortnight or so, it is something that is always happening. But the openness of government agencies to share that information, even if they aren't attributing it to anyone, does seem to become more common. We know that in the past the Prime Minister has also had to stand up and say that the occupants of this very building have been subject to cyber attacks. Political parties targeted by groups that were also suspected of being linked to China just over a year ago. So it is something that has always been bubbling away, and Rachel Falk from the Federal Government's Cybersecurity Research Centre says it's just something that they're constantly monitoring.
I don't think it's necessarily new or different. Its scale might be different, as in could be more targets across more places in Australia. But I think I would say it is just an impact. It's the effect of him saying, look, this is happening. We can't not say it's happening. And you really need to be aware of the fact that out there at the moment, there seems to be an actor doing pretty significant and sophisticated things.
Rachel Falk from the Federal Government's Cybersecurity Research Centre. So we will no doubt see further speculation about this attack, who it was directed by in the coming weeks and months, but government officials suggesting that there is only one culprit who could have been behind such a wide-scale intrusion on Australia's computer networks. Kirsten?
Thank you. The Federal Education Minister, Dan Tehan, has announced a major shake-up of the university sector. Under the proposed changes, the cost of a humanities degree will double, while fees for maths, teaching and nursing courses will come down. National Education reporter Connor Duffy joins me now. Connor, take us through just what the government has announced.
Yes, good afternoon, Kirsten. This is a really huge deal for the education sector. Basically, the government's unapologetic that it's decided to pick winners and losers. It's prioritising the jobs that it believes will turbocharge Australia's economic recovery from the COVID pandemic. Now, as you mentioned, if we just run through the winners, agriculture and maths degrees will be about 62% cheaper next year than they are this year. Teaching, nursing and others will go down by 46%. Science, IT, those kind of courses will be about 20% cheaper. Medicine, dental and veterinary science degrees won't be changed. However, the sting, I guess, for students considering studying next year is that the big losers will be the students choosing to study law and commerce. They'll have a 28% increase, and even more drastically, the humanities, which is going to see an increase of 113%. So that will mean effectively that an arts degree is going to cost around $45,000. Now, the government says that that's what they want, that they want to create a financial incentive for people to study certain courses and a disincentive to study others. Here's why the Education Minister says this is necessary.
We are facing the biggest employment challenge since the Great Depression, and the biggest impact will be felt by young Australians. They are relying on us to give them the opportunity to succeed in the jobs of the future.
Now, Connor, you described this as a huge deal. There has been a lot of reaction so far.
Yes, that's right. And as you can imagine, Kirsten, for a policy like this that creates such clear winners and losers, opinions are very divided about this. I've spoken to many academics today from the humanities who say that the government is completely ignoring the value of the soft skills and critical thinking that were included in its own future skills report. Of course, representatives from maths and science, some of them are very pleased, but it really is creating quite a shock in the tertiary sector, because eventually these kind of price points will have to, you'd think, trigger staffing changes as students move from one course to another. So as well as the National Union of Students and the National Union of Academics, we've also heard from Labor's education spokeswoman today, Tanya Plibersek, and here's what she had to say.
Today, the Minister announced extra places at Australian universities for Australian students. That's a good thing. The fine print in this announcement is that other students will be paying for these extra students. What we see on average is that students will be paying extra for a university education to make room for additional students.
So that was Labor's education spokeswoman, Tanya Plibersek. So really, Kirsten, just in summary, this is probably the biggest change to universities in a couple of decades. It's really huge news. And I guess the bigger picture too is that it sends a message to universities that there's the $1 billion rescue plan that they were hoping for isn't coming. And the only choice really they've got is to get on board with the government's plans, and that they're going to have to to probably adjust their operations accordingly.
We'll be taking some more reaction on this announcement as well throughout the afternoon. Connor Duffy, thank you. New South Wales opposition MP has resigned from shadow cabinet in Labor's deepening branch stacking controversy. Member for Granville, Julia Finn, stepped down from her shadow portfolio this afternoon. Ms Finn was named in an internal investigation into branch stacking issues, but a senior Labor MP this week told Parliament no recommendations against Ms Finn were made in the report. She's expected to release a statement in the coming hours. Victoria's Deputy Chief Health Officer expects a COVID-19 cluster linked to a Melbourne hotel to grow. There's been a net increase of 12 coronavirus cases in the state overnight. 5 of them have been found in security guards working at the Stamford Plaza Hotel, which has been used to quarantine returning travellers. The next stage in relaxing restrictions will go ahead on Monday despite the rising cases. Gyms, cinemas, indoor sports centres and concert venues will reopen for the first time since March.
Monday's restrictions are going ahead as planned, and we will continue to monitor and determine what may or may not come after Monday. At this point in time, it's so close to the day that 2 days are not going to make a huge difference, to be honest. So the current plan is that Monday will go ahead.
7 new cases of COVID-19 have been recorded in New South Wales in the past 24 hours. All cases are returned travellers in hotel quarantine. The total number of cases in the state is now 3,143. More than 17,000 tests were conducted in the latest reporting period.
COVID-19 is obviously causing massive grief across the world. It continues to spread across the world. The World Health Organisation has noted just in the last few days that it remains a massive problem worldwide, and it's growing. But here in New South Wales and here in Australia, all the state and territory governments have worked very hard with our frontline clinicians and of course the public to make sure that as far as is possible we have managed and controlled COVID-19. I have to say initially though that COVID-19 is still amongst us. There is no question that COVID-19 is circulating still in parts of Australia. Indeed, we are also concerned that it may be circulating here in New South Wales. People can be asymptomatic. The last 24-hour period, we've had 7 more people confirmed with COVID-19, but fortuitously they've all been from travellers, Australians or permanent residents returning to Australia, and they're in quarantine. But we know from other parts of Australia, particularly in Victoria at the moment, that there's clear evidence of transmission, and we remain concerned about the possibility of that transmission of COVID-19 escalating.
Restrictions are continuing.